The whisper came when the house was completely quiet. "Grandpa, run." I froze. My granddaughter Emma stood in the hallway outside the guest room. Barefoot. Pale. Her voice barely louder than breath. "Run," she repeated. At first I thought she was joking. Children sometimes whisper strange things at night. But Emma wasn't smiling. She was trembling. Not just nervous. Terrified. Her small hands were shaking. And she kept glancing over her shoulder. Toward the dark staircase behind her. Not once. Over and over again. Like she was afraid someone might suddenly appear there. "Why?" I asked quietly. My voice sounded strange even to me. Her eyes filled with tears. Emma hesitated. Her lower lip trembled. "Because." She swallowed hard. Her voice dropped to a whisper so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Because Daddy said you won't leave this house alive." For a second I couldn't move. I didn't breathe. It felt as if the air in the hallway had suddenly turned to ice. 3 days earlier my entire life had collapsed. My house. My savings. My independence. All gone. And my daughter had opened her door to me. Or at least. That's what I thought. But the way Emma was staring at me now. Wide-eyed. Terrified. Waiting for me to understand. Something inside this house was very, very wrong. Something that had already started. And I had walked straight into it. Emma was still standing in the hallway, shaking. I stepped forward quickly and gently took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Emma," I whispered, "what did you hear?" She opened her mouth to answer. But then we both heard it. A sound downstairs. A door closing. Slow. Heavy footsteps. Not rushing. Not careless. Deliberate. Emma's grip tightened around my hand. "He's awake," she whispered. My heart began to pound. Not just fast. Hard. Like my body already understood something my mind was still trying to deny. "Go back to your room," I told her quietly. Her eyes widened. "But. Now." For a moment she didn't move. Then she nodded and slipped down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. I closed the guest room door slowly. Carefully. And locked it. Only then did I allow myself to breathe again. "Daddy said you won't leave this house alive." The words repeated in my mind like a broken recording. Mark. My son-in-law. A man I had trusted. A man who had invited me into his home. Why would Emma say something like that? Children imagine things. They misunderstand adult conversations. They exaggerate. That was what I tried to tell myself. But something about the fear in her voice refused to leave my mind. Emma wasn't confused. She was terrified. And children don't fake that kind of fear. I walked to the window. Outside, the ocean stretched into darkness. The house stood alone on the cliff, surrounded by trees and empty road. No neighbors. No streetlights. No easy way out in the middle of the night. A beautiful place. And suddenly it felt different. Not peaceful. Not quiet. It felt isolated. Like the kind of place where no one would hear you if something went wrong. A beautiful place. And suddenly it felt like a trap. 3 weeks earlier my life had looked completely different. My name is Leonard Brooks. For most of my life I built software companies. Not flashy startups. Real businesses. The kind that quietly made money. The kind that other companies eventually bought. By 58 I had sold my largest company to a tech corporation in Seattle. It had been the deal of my life. Enough money to retire comfortably. Enough to help my daughter when she needed it. Enough to believe I had secured my future. Enough to make certain people very interested in what I owned. But security can disappear faster than people think. It started with an investment. A digital asset platform that had looked completely legitimate. Regulated. Audited. Recommended by financial advisors. I didn't gamble. I diversified. But when the platform collapsed, half my liquid assets vanished overnight. Millions. Gone. Still, I had my house. A modest coastal home I had lived in for almost 30 years. That was supposed to be my safety. Until the fire. It started in the garage. An electrical fault, the investigators said. By the time the firefighters arrived, half the structure had been destroyed. Insurance would cover some of it. Eventually. But investigations take time. And living in a burnt house wasn't exactly possible. That was when Claire called. My daughter. Dad, come stay with us, she said. You shouldn't deal with all this alone. Her husband Mark had agreed immediately. We've got the space, he said. And honestly, the kids would love having you around. At the time it felt like a blessing. Their house was large. Modern. Built on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Glass walls. Steel beams. Expensive architecture. Far beyond anything Claire could have afforded growing up. Mark had done well in finance. Investment management. Crypto markets. Risk capital. The kind of world I never fully trusted. But Claire loved him. And they seemed happy. When I arrived 3 days ago, everything had felt warm. Claire hugged me at the door. Emma and Noah ran down the stairs yelling, Grandpa. Mark shook my hand with a friendly smile. Glad you're here, he said. Dinner that night had been pleasant. Wine. Conversation. Stories about the kids. For a moment I had even felt grateful for the disaster that forced me here. Sometimes losing everything brings family closer. Or so I believed. But small things started to feel strange the next day. Subtle things. The kind that are easy to ignore. Mark asking unusual questions about my finances. How much did the insurance company approve? When will the claim be processed? Did the crypto platform leave you anything at all? At the time I assumed he was just concerned. Trying to help. Trying to understand. But the questions kept coming. Too many. Too precise. And each time he asked them. He watched my face very carefully. Claire seemed uncomfortable whenever he asked them. She would change the subject quickly. Or suddenly stand up to clear plates. Then there were the phone calls. Late at night. Mark would step outside onto the balcony. Speaking quietly. Always after he thought everyone else had gone to bed. The first night I didn't think about it. The second night I noticed. Tonight was the third. And tonight Emma had whispered something that shattered every comforting explanation I had built in my head. Daddy said you won't leave this house alive. I sat down slowly on the edge of the guest bed. Listening. The house was silent again. But sleep was impossible now. Somewhere downstairs Mark was awake. And suddenly I realized something disturbing. Emma hadn't said Mark wanted me to leave. She had said something far worse. You won't leave this house alive. Which meant one thing. If the frightened whisper of a child was telling the truth. Then whatever Mark was planning. Had already begun. And I had walked straight into it. If Emma was telling the truth. Then the danger wasn't somewhere far away. It was already inside this house. Under the same roof. Closer than I wanted to believe. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt amplified. Too loud. Too sharp. The creak of the wooden beams. The low hum of the ocean wind hitting the glass walls. The distant thud of footsteps somewhere below. Around 2 in the morning I heard a door open. Then close again. Slowly. Carefully. Someone moving through the house while everyone else slept. Not wandering. Not restless. Moving with purpose. I sat up in the darkness. Listening. For a moment I considered opening the door and looking. But Emma's whisper stopped me. "Grandpa, run." The fear in her voice replayed in my mind. Children rarely invent fear like that. Especially Emma. Emma was quiet. Observant. The kind of child who noticed things adults missed. The kind who listened more than she spoke. And if she had been that terrified, there was a reason. Morning came slowly. I must have fallen asleep sometime after 4. When I woke up, sunlight was already filling the room. The house felt normal again. Peaceful. Almost welcoming. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen. For a moment I almost convinced myself the entire night had been a misunderstanding. A child's imagination. A tired mind jumping to conclusions. Until I walked downstairs. Claire was standing at the kitchen counter. Her back was turned as she poured coffee. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Dad." "Morning." Mark was already sitting at the table. Laptop open. Phone beside his coffee. He looked up. "Sleep well?" His tone was casual. Friendly. But something about the way he watched me felt measured. Careful. Like he was studying my reaction. "Not really," I said. He nodded slowly. "New house," he said. "Takes time to adjust." Emma sat quietly beside Noah at the table. She avoided looking at me. But when our eyes finally met, she gave the smallest possible shake of her head. Almost invisible. "Don't say anything." I understood. Breakfast continued like nothing had happened. Claire made eggs. Noah talked about a school project. Mark scrolled through financial charts on his laptop. Numbers moving across the screen. Green. Red. Constant movement. Normal family life. At least on the surface. Except for one thing. Mark kept studying me. Every few minutes his eyes lifted from the screen. Watching. Evaluating. As if he were calculating something. Finally he closed the laptop. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. "So," he said. "Have you spoken to the insurance adjuster yet?" Claire immediately stiffened. "Mark." "What?" he said lightly. "I'm just asking." I took a sip of coffee. "They're still investigating." "How long do those things usually take?" "A few weeks." He leaned back. "And the crypto situation?" Claire suddenly stood up. Too quickly. "I forgot to buy milk," she said. Her voice was forced. "We need milk." Mark frowned slightly. "We have milk." But Claire was already grabbing her purse. "I'll go to the store." And just like that she left the kitchen. The silence that followed felt heavy. Thicker than before. Mark watched the door close. Then turned back to me. "You know," he said slowly, "a lot of people lose everything after financial disasters like that." I said nothing. He continued. "Especially older investors." There was something in the way he said older. Something deliberate. Something testing. And sometimes, he added, stress can affect judgment. Now I looked directly at him. "What are you implying?" He smiled. "Nothing warm in it." "Oh, nothing," he said. "Just conversation." Emma's fork clattered softly against her plate. She had stopped eating. Her hands were shaking. Mark glanced at her. Emma, finish your breakfast. She didn't move. He repeated it. More firmly. Emma. Slowly she picked up her fork again. But she still wouldn't look at him. After breakfast Mark stood up. I've got a call, he said. Then he walked out to the balcony. Just like the night before. The same quiet routine. I waited a few seconds. Then quietly followed. I didn't step outside. I stayed inside the doorway where he couldn't see me. But I could hear him. His voice was low. Tense. Yes, he's here. Pause. I told you already. He lost the house. Another pause. No. The insurance will cover it eventually. Then his voice dropped even lower. Barely above a whisper. And if things go the way we discussed, it won't matter anyway. My stomach tightened. Silence. Then the sentence that made my blood run cold. Relax. He won't be a problem much longer. I stepped back from the doorway slowly. Carefully. So the floor wouldn't creak. So he wouldn't know I had heard. Suddenly Emma's whisper returned to my mind. Grandpa, run. At that moment one terrifying possibility began forming in my head. A possibility I didn't want to believe. But I still didn't understand why. Why would Mark want me gone? What could he possibly gain? The answer came sooner than I expected. And when it did, it revealed something far worse than simple greed. I moved away from the balcony before Mark could turn around. My heart was beating faster now. Much faster. He won't be a problem much longer. The words echoed in my head. Cold. Certain. I walked back into the kitchen. Emma was still sitting at the table, staring down at her plate. Her shoulders were tense. Noah had already gone upstairs. The house felt strangely empty. Too quiet. Emma, I said quietly. She looked up immediately. Fear flashed across her face. The same fear I had seen in the hallway the night before. I lowered my voice. What did you hear last night? Her eyes darted toward the balcony door. Mark was still outside. Talking. Emma leaned closer. I wasn't supposed to hear it, she whispered. Hear what? Her fingers twisted nervously around the edge of the table. Daddy was talking to someone on the phone. My chest tightened. What did he say? Emma hesitated. Then she spoke very softly. He said you ruined everything. I frowned. Ruined what? I don't know. She swallowed. But he said you were the reason the plan failed. A cold sensation spread slowly through my stomach. What plan? Emma shook her head quickly. I don't know. I swear. Her voice began to tremble. But he was really angry. Then she leaned even closer. And he said something else. What? Emma looked straight into my eyes. He said if you stayed alive, everything would fall apart. For a moment the room felt smaller. The walls closer. The air heavier. How long ago was this conversation? I asked. Yesterday afternoon. Where were you? In the hallway upstairs. She glanced toward the balcony again. I don't think he knew I was there. I nodded slowly. Emma, I said carefully, have you heard him say things like that before? She hesitated. Then she nodded. My pulse quickened. When? 2 nights ago. What did he say then? Emma lowered her voice even more. He was talking to Mommy. That made me freeze. What did they say? I didn't hear everything, she whispered. But Mommy kept saying. Emma struggled to remember. She kept saying it was too dangerous. And Daddy said. Emma's voice dropped to almost nothing. He said it was already too late. The balcony door slid open suddenly. Emma straightened immediately. Mark walked back into the kitchen. His expression was calm. Too calm. "Emma," he said lightly, "did you finish breakfast?" She nodded quickly. "Good." He poured himself another cup of coffee. Then looked at me. "Claire went to the store?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. Then leaned against the counter. "You know," he said, "we should probably talk about your situation." "My situation?" He smiled. "Your finances." There it was again. Always the same subject. "Mark," I said carefully, "why are you so interested in my finances?" He chuckled. "Well, you're living here now. That affects the household." I studied him closely. His face was relaxed. But his eyes were calculating. Watching. Measuring. "You lost the house," he continued. "Your investments collapsed. And you're what, 68 now?" 69. "Right." He nodded thoughtfully. "That must be stressful." "I'm managing." "Of course you are." He took a sip of coffee. Then said something that made the air in the room turn heavy. "You know what happens sometimes when older men go through financial trauma?" I said nothing. "They make irrational decisions." Emma stopped breathing. I could hear it. "They forget things," Mark continued calmly. "They become unstable." Now I understood what he was doing. He wasn't just asking questions. He was building something. A narrative. A story. I leaned forward slightly. "Mark," I said quietly, "what exactly are you suggesting?" He shrugged. "Oh, nothing right now." Then he smiled again. But there was nothing friendly in it. "But if things ever got complicated." He tapped his temple lightly. "It might be good to have some medical evaluations." Emma suddenly pushed back her chair. "I'm done," she said quickly. Then she hurried upstairs. Mark watched her go. Then turned back to me. "You know," he said slowly, "families sometimes have to make difficult decisions." "What kind of decisions?" He finished his coffee. The smile disappeared. "The kind that protect everyone." Then he walked out of the kitchen. Leaving me standing there. Alone. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Mark wasn't just planning to remove me. He was planning to make sure no one believed me. And if Emma was right. If Claire already knew about it. Then I might not have a single ally left in this house. Except for 2 frightened children. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a darker thought began forming. If Mark was trying to prove I was unstable. Then maybe the real plan had nothing to do with accidents. Maybe the plan was something far worse. Something that could erase me quietly. Without leaving a single trace. For the rest of that day, I watched. Quietly. Carefully. If Mark was building a story about my instability, then any sudden reaction from me would only help him. So I did the opposite. I stayed calm. Polite. Grateful. Exactly the way a harmless old man should behave. But inside, my mind was racing. Why would Mark want me declared unstable? Money was the obvious answer. But Mark already had money. The house alone was worth several million. Claire's lifestyle confirmed it. Private school for the kids. Luxury cars. Expensive architecture overlooking the ocean. Yet something in his tone earlier had suggested pressure. Desperation. That evening, I got my first real clue. It happened during dinner. Claire was quieter than usual. Mark was checking his phone repeatedly. And Emma barely touched her food. Halfway through the meal, Mark stood up. "I need to take this." He walked toward his office. Claire followed him a moment later. I heard the office door close. Emma looked up at me immediately. Now, she whispered. Now what? I asked. Noah found something. My heart skipped. Where is he? In Daddy's office. My first instinct was to stop her. Breaking into Mark's office was dangerous. But something in Emma's face told me this was important. Very important. Come, she said. We moved quietly down the hallway. Emma opened the office door just a few inches. Noah sat at the desk. The glow of a computer screen lit his face. Grandpa, he whispered urgently. You need to see this. I stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of leather and electronics. Expensive equipment everywhere. 3 monitors. Stacks of financial papers. Noah turned the screen toward me. It was a document. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach tightened. My name was on the top line. Leonard Brooks, Asset Evaluation Report. Below it were numbers. My bank accounts. My retirement funds. My property records. Everything. Where did you find this? I asked quietly. Noah pointed to a folder on the desktop. There are more. He opened another document. This one was worse. Guardianship petition draft. I felt the air leave my lungs. The document described me as mentally unstable. Financially reckless. Unable to manage my own affairs. It even referenced the crypto losses. As evidence of deteriorating judgment. Who wrote this? I whispered. Noah shook his head. But there's more. He clicked another file. This one contained emails. Dozens of them. Between Mark and a law firm. The subject line repeated over and over. Emergency guardianship filing. One message caught my eye. I leaned closer. My hands were shaking now. The email read. Once the psychological evaluation confirms cognitive decline, control of Brooks' assets can be transferred immediately. Another message followed. Insurance settlement and remaining investments will be protected under guardian authority. Protected. Meaning Mark. He wasn't just trying to take my money. He was planning to legally take control of my entire life. My accounts. My property. Even my medical decisions. And if the court believed I was mentally incompetent, I would never get my freedom back. I closed my eyes slowly. Now the earlier conversation made sense. Older investors. Financial trauma. Medical evaluation. Mark wasn't planning an accident. Not anymore. That would be messy. Risky. Instead he was preparing something far cleaner. Something far more permanent. He was going to erase me legally. Turn me into a helpless old man who couldn't control his own life. And the worst part. My own daughter might be helping him. Noah suddenly whispered. Grandpa, there's one more file. He opened a video. Security camera footage. From the side of the house. The screen showed the cliff path behind the property. My heart stopped. I recognized the location instantly. Mark and I had walked there yesterday morning. Just the two of us. At the time he had called it a beautiful view. But the camera showed something else. Something terrifying. Mark standing near the edge. Looking down. Measuring the distance. Testing the loose gravel with his foot. Preparing. Planning. Emma grabbed my arm. That's why I told you to run, she whispered. At that moment a realization hit me harder than anything else. The guardianship plan. The legal documents. The conversations about my instability. Those weren't the first plan. They were the backup plan. Because originally, Mark had intended something much simpler. Something that would leave no paperwork. No court hearings. No witnesses. Just one small accident. On a cliff above the ocean. For a long moment none of us spoke. The video kept playing. Mark standing near the edge of the cliff path. Looking down. Testing the gravel with the tip of his shoe. Then stepping back. Like a man calculating something. Calculating how easily another man might fall. Noah closed the video. The room felt colder now. He was waiting for you to walk there with him, Noah whispered. I nodded slowly. Yesterday morning. Mark had suggested a walk along the cliff trail behind the house. Fresh air, he said. Good for stress. I remembered how friendly he had sounded. How relaxed. And I remembered something else. At one point we had stopped near the edge. Mark had stood slightly behind me. Very close. Too close. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now the memory made my stomach twist. Emma suddenly grabbed my sleeve. We have to close it, she whispered. What? The computer. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Claire. Noah quickly shut down the files. Emma wiped the keyboard with her sleeve. The office door opened. Claire stood there. For a moment she simply stared at us. Emma, she said slowly. What are you doing in here? Emma froze. Noah looked at the floor. Claire's eyes moved to me. Dad? I took a breath. We were just looking for Noah's school tablet. Claire stepped inside. Something about her face looked wrong. Not angry. Not surprised. Something closer to, nervous. You shouldn't be in Mark's office, she said quietly. I know. Her eyes studied my face carefully. Then she asked something that made my heart sink. Did you see anything? The room went silent. Emma looked at me. Noah looked at me. Claire was waiting. That was the moment I understood something terrible. She already knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. I decided to test it. Yes, I said calmly. Claire's face went pale. What did you see? She asked quickly. A few financial documents. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Oh. But also some emails. The color drained from her face completely. Claire closed the office door behind her. Very slowly. Then she leaned against it. For several seconds she didn't speak. When she finally did. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You weren't supposed to see those. Emma gasped softly. Claire closed her eyes. Dad, she said quietly. You need to understand something. My chest tightened. Understand what? She hesitated. Then the words came out. Mark is in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. How serious? Her answer came slowly. Very serious. She stepped closer. There were investments. Crypto markets. Leverage positions. Venture funds. My stomach sank. How much did he lose? Claire swallowed. Almost everything. The room went completely still. And you think my money will fix it? I asked. Claire didn't answer. That was answer enough. I felt something inside me crack. Not anger. Something deeper. Disappointment. You're my daughter, I said quietly. Tears appeared in her eyes. I know. And you're helping him do this? Her voice broke. It wasn't supposed to go this far. What was the original plan? Claire hesitated. Then whispered something that made Emma start crying. He was just going to push you. The words hung in the air like poison. Push me, I repeated. On the cliff trail, she said. It would look like an accident. My granddaughter's hands were shaking now. But then, Claire continued, after the fire and the insurance investigation. Mark said we needed something safer. Safer? The guardianship. Her eyes filled with tears. He said it was temporary. He said we would give everything back once his investments recovered. I stared at her. You believe that? Claire didn't answer. That silence said everything. I suddenly realized something else. You knew Emma heard you, I said quietly. Claire looked at the floor. Yes. And you still went along with it. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't know what to do. You could have told me. Her voice cracked. I was afraid of him. The office door handle suddenly turned. All four of us froze. And then Mark's voice came from the hallway. Claire. My daughter's eyes widened in panic. Because now there was one terrible truth none of us could escape. Mark was coming back. And if he realized what we had discovered, the next accident might happen tonight. The office door handle moved again. Claire. Mark called from the hallway. My daughter wiped her eyes quickly. Just a minute, she answered. Her voice sounded almost normal. Almost. But I could see the fear behind it. Emma and Noah stood frozen beside the desk. 4 people in a room that suddenly felt too small. Too fragile. Claire leaned closer to me and whispered quickly. Don't say anything yet. Too late for that. The truth was already out. But I understood what she meant. If Mark suspected we had seen the files, he might panic. And a desperate man is the most dangerous kind. I gave her a small nod. Claire opened the office door. Mark stood in the hallway. His expression was calm. But his eyes moved quickly across the room. Me. Emma. Noah. The computer. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, Claire said. Mark's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Then he smiled. That's good. He stepped inside. Dinner in 20 minutes, he added casually. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway. The moment he disappeared, the tension in the room broke. Emma exhaled sharply. He knows something's wrong, she whispered. Not yet, I said. But he will. Noah looked at me. What do we do now? That was the question. Running would be the obvious answer. Leave the house. Call the police. Tell them everything. But something inside me resisted that idea. Not because I doubted the danger. Because I finally understood Mark. He was building a narrative. An unstable old man. Financial collapse. Emotional stress. Confusion. If I suddenly accused him without proof, he would twist the story. And suddenly I would look exactly the way he wanted. Paranoid. Unstable. Dangerous to myself. Maybe even dangerous to the children. No. This had to be done carefully. Quietly. I turned back to the computer. Noah, I said softly. Can you copy those files? He nodded immediately. I already started. The boy opened a small flash drive beside the keyboard. Everything's transferring. Smart kid. Very smart. Emma looked at me. What about the video? That too. Within seconds the files began copying. Documents. Emails. Financial records. Guardianship drafts. Every piece of evidence Mark had been careless enough to leave on that machine. But something else caught my attention. Another folder. Different from the others. Its name was simple. Legal, priority. Open that, I said. Noah clicked. Inside were several scanned documents. Insurance forms. Investment statements. Then one file near the bottom. My name again. Leonard Brooks, Life Insurance. I leaned closer. Policy value, $3 million. My breath slowed. I remembered signing that policy years ago. A standard retirement safeguard. But the beneficiary line made my chest tighten. Primary beneficiary, Claire Dalton. Of course. My daughter. But the next line made the entire room go silent. Secondary financial administrator, Mark Dalton. In the event of beneficiary incapacity. Mark. Which meant if something happened to Claire. Mark controlled everything. Emma looked up at me. What does that mean? It means, I said quietly, Mark doesn't just want my money. I closed the file. He wants control of everything connected to it. Claire stared at the screen. I didn't even know that policy still existed. Mark had known. He had studied my finances carefully. Every asset. Every account. Every legal vulnerability. And now he had built two different plans. Plan 1, an accident on the cliff. Plan 2, guardianship through the courts. Either way. I lost everything. I looked at the children. Then at Claire. A strange calm began to settle over me. For the first time since Emma's whisper. I wasn't afraid. Because Mark had made one critical mistake. He believed I was weak. A confused old man who had lost his fortune. Someone easy to manipulate. Easy to erase. But he didn't know something about me. I had spent 40 years building companies in one of the most ruthless industries on earth. Technology. Where one wrong move destroys entire businesses overnight. Where survival depends on preparation. Strategy. And patience. If Mark wanted to play games with control. Then I would let him. For a little while longer. Long enough to gather every piece of evidence. Long enough to understand his entire plan. And then. Very quietly. I would end it. Because Mark Dalton thought he was hunting an old man. What he didn't realize was something far more dangerous. He had just started a war with the wrong person. By the next morning, the house looked peaceful again. Sunlight poured through the glass walls. The ocean glittered beyond the cliff. Emma and Noah were getting ready for school. Claire moved through the kitchen quietly, her eyes avoiding mine. And Mark sat at the table scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world was wrong. But now I knew the truth. And more importantly, I had the evidence. The flash drive Noah copied the night before was in my pocket. Emails. Financial files. Guardianship drafts. Insurance documents. Everything Mark had hidden on his computer. Everything he thought no one would ever see. Breakfast passed in silence. Mark finally looked up. So, he said casually, I was thinking we should talk to a doctor today. Claire froze. Emma stopped eating. A doctor? I asked. Just a routine evaluation, Mark said smoothly. For stress. He leaned back in his chair. You've been through a lot recently. House fire. Financial loss. Relocation. That kind of pressure can affect people. There it was. The first official step of his plan. Once a doctor wrote the wrong words in a report. Mark could begin the guardianship process. I nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. Mark smiled. He hadn't expected agreement. Great, he said. I already scheduled an appointment. Claire's eyes flickered toward me in confusion. She didn't understand why I wasn't fighting. But that was exactly the point. Mark needed to believe I was walking into the trap willingly. Before we go, I said calmly, I need to take a short walk. Mark shrugged. Sure. The cliff path again. The same trail where he once planned to push me. Now it would serve a different purpose. 20 minutes later I stood near the edge of the trail. But I wasn't alone. 2 police detectives stood beside me. And behind them, a quiet black sedan. I had called them early that morning, before anyone else in the house woke up. At first they were skeptical. But when I mentioned attempted murder and guardianship fraud, they agreed to listen. Then I showed them the flash drive, emails, financial manipulation, insurance planning, and the security footage of Mark studying the cliff edge. That video changed everything. Now they were interested. Very interested. You're sure he doesn't know about this? One detective asked. Yes. Good. The second detective closed his notebook. We'll handle the rest. 20 minutes later we drove back toward the house. My pulse remained steady. 40 years in business had taught me one thing. Revenge doesn't require anger. Only timing. When we entered the driveway, Mark was already outside. He must have seen the police car. His face changed instantly. Confusion. Then concern. Then calculation. What's going on? He asked. The detective stepped out of the car. Mr. Mark Dalton. Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Mark forced a smile. About what? The detective held up a printed document. Financial fraud. Then another paper. An attempted murder. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire stepped out of the house behind him. Her face pale. Emma and Noah appeared in the doorway. Mark laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. He turned toward me. Leonard, what is this? I met his eyes calmly. The consequences, I said. One detective opened the car door. Mr. Dalton, we're going to need you to come with us. Mark's smile disappeared. You can't be serious. We are. His voice rose slightly. This old man is confused. He's under extreme stress. There are medical evaluations scheduled today. The detective nodded. Yes. We know. He held up the flash drive. And we've reviewed the files. For the first time. Mark looked afraid. Real fear. The kind that appears when a plan collapses faster than expected. Leonard, he said sharply, you're making a mistake. No, I replied quietly. You did. Mark's confidence cracked the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. For a second he simply stared at them. Like a man who couldn't believe the world had suddenly turned against him. This is insane, he said. His voice wasn't calm anymore. You're arresting the wrong person. The detective didn't react. Mr. Dalton, you are being detained pending investigation for financial fraud, conspiracy, and attempted homicide. The words hung in the air. Emma squeezed Noah's hand in the doorway. Claire stood frozen on the porch. Mark's eyes moved quickly between all of us. Then they landed on me. You did this, he said quietly. I didn't answer. Because the truth was obvious. He had done this to himself. The detective guided him toward the car. Mark suddenly turned toward Claire. Say something, he demanded. Tell them he's unstable. Claire didn't move. Claire, he said again. Now his voice carried something new. Panic. You know he's not thinking clearly. Claire's lips trembled. But the words that came out were not what Mark expected. He's thinking perfectly clearly. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Mark stared at her. You're serious? Tears rolled down Claire's cheeks. Yes. Mark's face hardened. So that's it, he said. You're just going to let them destroy everything? Claire shook her head slowly. No, Mark. You did that. The detective placed Mark inside the police car. The door closed. And for the first time since Emma whispered those terrifying words in the hallway, I allowed myself to breathe. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because Mark Dalton's problems had only just begun. 2 days later the investigation widened. The financial records from his computer revealed something the detectives hadn't expected. Mark's losses weren't just large. They were catastrophic. He had borrowed heavily to cover his crypto investments. Private lenders. Offshore accounts. Risky leverage trades. And when the market collapsed, he had tried to hide the damage by moving money that didn't belong to him. Client money. Millions of dollars. Within a week, federal investigators became involved. The charges expanded quickly. Fraud. Embezzlement. Securities violations. And conspiracy to commit homicide. Every document Noah had copied became evidence. Every email. Every legal draft. Every careless message Mark thought no one would ever read. The guardianship petition alone was enough to show intent. But the cliff footage sealed his fate. A prosecutor later described it as premeditation caught on camera. Meanwhile the financial collapse spread outward. Mark's investment firm shut down within days. Accounts were frozen. Investigations opened. Clients began filing lawsuits. His carefully constructed reputation collapsed faster than the crypto market he had trusted. But the hardest moment came 3 weeks later. Claire and I sat together in a quiet courtroom. Emma and Noah waited outside with a family friend. Mark stood at the defense table. No expensive suit this time. No confident smile. Just a tired man in a plain jacket. The judge reviewed the evidence silently. Then he looked up. Mr. Dalton, he said. Given the seriousness of these charges and the strength of the evidence presented. The room felt completely still. Bail is denied. Mark lowered his head. The guards stepped forward. And as they escorted him out of the courtroom, his eyes found mine one last time. But this time there was no anger. No arrogance. Only the quiet realization that every plan he had built had collapsed. 3 months later, the house on the cliff felt different. Quieter. Lighter. Mark Dalton was no longer part of it. The trial moved quickly once the full investigation was complete. The financial evidence alone was overwhelming. But the attempted murder charge made everything worse for him. The video from the security camera. The emails about guardianship. The insurance policy. And the messages discussing how my accident would solve his financial problems. All of it formed a picture the jury could not ignore. The verdict came after less than 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty. On every major count. Fraud. Financial crimes. Conspiracy. And attempted homicide. When the sentence was read months later, the courtroom was almost empty. Claire sat beside me. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Mark stood in front of the judge with the same tired expression he had worn for weeks. The judge spoke calmly. But the words carried enormous weight. Mr. Dalton, your actions were calculated, predatory, and deeply abusive toward your own family. He paused. 30 years. Claire closed her eyes. The gavel struck. And that was the end of Mark Dalton's plans. But life doesn't simply reset after something like that. The damage doesn't disappear overnight. Claire spent weeks trying to rebuild what Mark had broken. The children struggled at first. Especially Emma. For a long time she blamed herself for what had happened. If she hadn't overheard the conversation. If she hadn't warned me. Maybe the family wouldn't have fallen apart. But she was wrong. The truth is simple. Emma saved my life. And slowly, the house began to heal. Claire eventually sold the Cliff property. Too many memories. Too many shadows. She and the children moved to a smaller place closer to town. And for the first time in years, our family began to rebuild itself honestly. As for me, the insurance claim from the fire finally settled. Not enough to restore everything I had lost. But enough to start again. I bought a small house near the water. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet place where Emma and Noah could visit whenever they wanted. Sometimes people ask me if I feel anger toward Mark. The truth is, I don't. Because revenge doesn't always require rage. Sometimes it only requires patience. Evidence. And the willingness to let the truth speak for itself. In the end, Mark Dalton destroyed his own life. All I did was make sure the truth was recorded. Thank you for listening. Calm justice doesn't shout. It keeps records.